Back, you're watching a special live broadcast countdown to the lockdown. That's in 1 hour, 45 minutes. SABC all around the country.
Occasionally wear the same little outfit and remember the good days.
And what was it then about being a magician that you enjoyed so much?
It's a very odd skill set because on one level you lock yourself away and you practice and you practice and you practice. So that's very insular, very isolating experience. But the other is you then get to go out in front of people and as a magician, the most amazing experience you get is to do your very odd skill set, because on one level, and you open your hand, lock yourself away, and you practice and you practice, and it is the look on people's faces. Very insular, very isolating experience. All the normal rules of reality don't apply. And this thing which they know is impossible, just the most amazing experience you get, wondrous experience, it feels a very odd skill set, because on one level, you open your hand, experience as a magician again and again, and what it's about is creating very insular, very isolating experience. Well, Richard, given your rules of reality don't apply. And this thing which they know is impossible, just the most amazing experience you get, wondrous experience, it feels a very odd skill set, because on one level, you open your hand, experience as a magician again and again, and what it's about is creating very insular, just for 1 minute. Well, Richard, given your rules of reality don't apply. And this thing which they know is impossible, just the most amazing experience you get, wondrous experience, it feels a very odd skill set, because on one level, you open your hand, experience as a magician again and again, and what it's about is creating very insular, just for 1 minute. Well, Richard, given your rules of reality don't apply. And this thing which they know is impossible, just the most amazing experience you get, wondrous experience, it feels a very odd skill set, because on one level, you open your hand, experience as a magician again and again, and what it's about is creating very insular, just for 1 minute. Well, Richard, given your rules of reality don't apply. And this thing which they know is impossible, just the most amazing experience you get, wondrous experience, it feels a very odd skill set, because on one level, you open your hand, experience as a magician again and again, and what it's about is creating very insular, just for 1 minute. Well, Richard, given your rules of reality don't apply. And this thing which they know is impossible, just the most amazing experience you get, wondrous experience, it feels a very odd skill set, because on one level, you open your hand, experience as a magician again and what it's about is creating very insular, just for 1 minute. Well, Richard, given your rules of reality don't apply. And this thing which they know is impossible, just the most
This radio station is not available at this time. Please try another station. This radio station is not available at this time. Please try another station. This radio station.
Time doing it, and you become better than everyone else, particularly when there's not many of them as competitors. And here I was, passionate about magic. I love Paris. Wonderful world. And I got to spend 4 years doing that full time. My goodness, who's not going to say And I almost didn't answer it. I mean, there's so many moments in my career that have just been down to good luck, I think. I almost didn't answer it. At the time, I was studying the psychology of lying because I was interested in deception and magic. And I thought it would be fun to get politicians from the leading parties onto television to lie and tell the truth, and the public phone in.
I can't possibly imagine that happening.
Well, I was so young and naive. And the public phone in and say which they thought was the lie, and then that would tell us which party's got the best liars. And I think that email I sent to them was probably 3 lines long, and it changed my life. So I get this phone call about 2 weeks later saying, we've chosen your experiment. This is going to be the first experiment, National Science Week, mass participation. We've never done this before. We're very excited. We contacted all the political parties, all the politicians, and they all said, no, we're not doing that. So it looked like we were dead in the water. And then someone said, how about we go with Robin Day, this sort of heavyweight political interviewer.
Presenter of Question Time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So Robin said, yep, absolutely, I'll do it. And so I went and interviewed him twice. Each time he spoke about his favourite film. One was a complete pack of lies, the other was the truth. And now we're on Tomorrow's World live. And we play these in at the top of the show. We don't know whether anyone's going to phone in. This is the first mass phone in. About 30,000 people do. We turn the results over live in the show and then talk about them at the end of the show. So it was such a fun thing to do.
Because, I mean, the plan was to try and identify the cues that we use to detect when people are lying. And how did you propose to do that?
Well, so in addition to the Tomorrow's World section, we'd also place just the soundtrack on BBC Radio and just the transcript in the Daily Telegraph. And the prediction was that people would be better lie detectors when they just heard the soundtrack or read the transcript. And lo and behold, that's exactly what we got. So if you watched it on television, you struggled to detect the lies. You heard it on radio, you were much better.
So if I want to work out if someone's lying, I should focus on what they say and how they say it, not the visual cues like body language. I mean, that's quite surprising, isn't it?
I think it was, and part of that is that if you're a politician and you want to lie, then stay off the radio. Just get yourself on TV. And those cues are great. So there's all sorts of them. So people tend to drop out personal references when they're lying. So me, mine, I drops away. They tend to say less. So Robin Day said about half the amount when he was lying than telling the truth. There's a bigger what's called response latency, which is the period of time between the end of the question and beginning of the answer. So all these things, and also there's a drop in emotionality. So all these things are obvious when you focus your attention on what they're saying. But when you get overwhelmed by the visual information, and we are visual animals, then suddenly you focus on the wrong thing. So absolutely, radio much harder to lie on.
And obviously another excellent reason why we should all listen to the radio and not be brainwashed by TV.
As if we needed another reason.
As if. OK, a quick question. I have to ask this now. In this age of fake news, are there any lessons that we can learn from your study about how to help people distinguish fact from fiction?
I think there is. I mean, with a politician, the biggest cue of them lying is their lips moving. That's the one that I would go with. The more serious answer, it's really tricky. So we think we're good at detecting lies. Yeah. We're absolutely not. And particularly in our partners, actually, when you get people that have been friends or in a relationship for 20 years, so on, they're very confident about detecting lies and actually particularly bad. So it's if you have been in a long-term relationship and think your partner's wonderful and telling you the truth, it's quite depressing.
The better you get to know them, the easier it is for them to lie.
Absolutely.
Talking about believing the unbelievable, I cut you off earlier when we were talking about the paranormal, and I know that you carried out a lot of research on the belief in ghosts and hauntings, particularly here in Edinburgh. And another topic you studied that falls under the banner of the paranormal is extrasensory perception, ESP. I mean, people have been studying this for 150 or more years, trying to see whether we do have this extrasensory sense. And almost all those studies have suggested that there might be something going on. You studied this. What did you find?
We found that we didn't think anything was going on. So it was, in a sense, contrary to what some of the previous research had found. And there you have a challenge. And that work isn't like the ghost work. It's laboratory-based. You have people coming in and trying to guess the order of a deck of cards, essentially, or whatever, something that's quite statistical. And as you say, for a long time, people have reported these positive results. And myself, and it wasn't just myself, other skeptics, other researchers, found that we couldn't replicate that.
And have you done any work on why people believe in the paranormal?
Yeah, some of my work has looked at that, and some of it is that we want to believe it, a little bit like watching
those of us who can stay home need to stay home.
Listen, we gotta all stop the spread of COVID-19 and help flatten the curve.
So if you can, please
stay home.
I think they're in spirit and so on. And I did that for quite a long time, and then started to look at more mainstream but irrational beliefs. And that's where I got into the psychology of luck.
And you went on to write a book on luck, the luck factor.
Yes.
How did that come about?
That came about because I've been studying luck for about a decade with 1,000 exceptionally lucky and unlucky people, which are really fascinating folks to have around. So the lucky people always in the right place at the right time and so on. The unlucky people, life never works out well for them. And then we started to understand that they were, for the most part, not always, but for the most part, creating their own good and bad luck by the way they were thinking and behaving. A decade in, we thought if we could persuade people to think and behave like a lucky person, could we change their luck? And so it was about taking folks and changing their thought patterns and their behaviour to make them luckier.
And that was the message of the book, that some people really are luckier than others. But you say it's not a matter of random chance. Being lucky is a skill that can be learned.
That's right.
And that was the message of the book, that
no
some
one had
people
really, very
are
few people had
luckier
really
than others. But you say it's not a matter of random chance.
Self-development
Being
and
lucky
self-help.
is a skill
You looked at the self-help
that can
books
be learned.
and they were just
That's right. And that was the message of the book.
And I think we
some
wanted really, very few people
luckier than others.
when we got people
But
saying
you say it's not a matter of random chance.
self-development
Being
and
lucky
self-help.
is a skill
So, for example,
and
they were just
that's right. And that was the message
we had people come in, and I think we
some
wanted
people
really,
very
very few people
luckier
really
than
count. We got
others.
people
But
saying
you say it's not a matter of
self-development
random
and
chance.
self-development
Being
and
lucky
self-help.
is a skill.
So, for example, and they were just come in, and I think we really, very few people really count. We got people saying self-development. One of which says self-help. So, for example, and they were just the other one says, tell the experiment you've seen this and win £100. And so the unlucky people would come in, count the photographs, miss the opportunities. It's just another unlucky day. And the lucky people would pause and go, wow, that's great. Do I get my £100? I would explain it's just an experiment. They weren't that lucky, but still. And that's to do with what's called the attentional spotlight, that when we look at the world, we're just seeing a small part of it. When we become very anxious, that becomes even more focused. Unlucky people feel very anxious. They're just not
and that's
seeing
to
the
do
world.
with what's called the
lucky
attentional
people,
spotlight,
much larger
when we look at the world,
we're
see
just seeing
these
small part
opportunities
of it,
and
when
not
we become
afraid
very
to
anxious,
then
that
move
becomes
forward.
even more focused.
So it was then about saying,
Unlucky
well,
people feel
what
very
could you put into
anxious.
people's
They're
heads?
just
And
not
that's
seeing
to
the
do
world.
with what's called the
Lucky
attentional
people,
spotlight,
much larger when we look at the world,
see these
opportunities,
surely when
and
it
we're not
becomes
afraid
so
to
large,
then move forward.
doesn't it really come down to the laws of physics?
And that's to do with what's called the lucky people, much larger when we look at the world.
So sometimes, no matter how positive our mindset is, life can still deal us a series of blows.
Yeah, of course. So I make a distinction between chance and luck. So none of our work will help you if you head to a casino. You're against the laws of chance, and you'll win or lose depending on how, quotes, lucky you are that night. I'm interested in luck in life, why some people are successful and other people aren't, why some people are happy and other people aren't. And there, you're not against chance. There's all sorts of things. So one of the scenarios we presented to people during our research was, imagine you're in a bank, in bursts a robber, they have a gun, they fire a shot, and it hits you in the arm. Are you lucky or are you unlucky? And that answer, the one word that pops into people's minds will tell me a huge amount about them. Because when I gave that scenario to the lucky people, they go, wow, just my good luck. It could have been my heart, could have been my head, it's just my arm. If it's a big raid, maybe the media are covering it. I'll sell my story to a journalist, I'll make some money. The unlucky people who go, I've just been shot in the arm. Why are you even asking the question? and that is related to resilience. Bad things will happen to all of us. That's life. Whether you bounce back from that Whether you consider yourself lucky because that bullet could have hit your head or your heart, or whether you consider yourself unlucky, dictates whether you will be resilient or not. And that's what I'm interested in, those kind of life skills that often sit below the surface but have a huge impact on our lives.
And I guess it's the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves that really makes a difference.
I think that's absolutely right. We tell ourselves stories. We tell ourselves who we are and who other people are. And when we tell our stories to others, they start treating us in that way. So you tell people you're unlucky, and people start remembering the things that didn't work out so well for you, and so on. And I think what's astonishing about the human mind is that we can tell ourselves different stories. We can change that story, and it has a real impact in terms of happiness and success.
It's easier said than done, though, isn't it?
Of course. It kind of is and it isn't. Often we don't understand how our minds work. Our intuitions are wrong. Once you understand the mindset of, say, a lucky and unlucky person, actually those changes don't need to be that challenging. So when events happen, doing the example with the bullet missing is what's called counterfactual thinking. Forcing yourself to do counterfactuals that were even worse than the thing that actually happened does change people's perception very quickly.
OK, so if that's the case, then what can I do to increase my luck?
Nothing.
OK.
It has limits. No, I think there's all sorts of things we can all do. And first of all, it's about being open to opportunities and making the most of them. So unlucky people tend to be very inflexible, where lucky people love new experiences. And that's a really good thing in terms of luck. So there's that. There's optimism, expecting the future to be bright. There's being resilient when bad things happen. And there's also intuition. Lucky people tend to trust their intuitions. So all these sorts of things, very small changes, but big impact.
Well, since your book, Richard, The Luck Factor, published in the early 2000s, a lucky break for you, I guess, really, because it turned out to be the first of many successful books. The positive psychology movement has really taken off. Is there a danger that we could go too far the other way? Could we end up so keen to promote positive thinking that we might end up, I don't know, deluded?
Yeah, I think there is, and I think a lot of that is based on a misunderstanding of psychology. So positive psychology isn't just about expecting the best. That can lead to all sorts of reckless behaviour. So if you go, well, I'm expecting the best, expect to be lucky, I'm not going to look both ways when I cross the road, you're going to be removing yourself from the gene pool fairly rapidly with that. What it is, though, is recognising that people have the potential to change, and it's giving them the tools to make those changes as effectively as possible. And particularly now, a lot of tension on children, where we mentioned social media before. It's putting a huge emphasis on the self. That you have all these people that are self-presenting as, look at my wonderful life, look how great I look today, look at all the wonderful things. And of course, if your life isn't that good, and that's most people's lives, now you feel even worse. And so we're encouraging people to do the thing that every positive psychologist will tell you not to do, which is just always compare yourself to people that have got more. It is a recipe for disaster. And so it's understanding what makes us unhappy and then what are the tools that can help reshape that.
A lot of people talk about whether you're a glass half full or glass half empty person. And you sound, Richard, like you are an optimist. Do you also consider yourself a lucky person?
No, it's been a disaster. I do. I consider, having worked with lucky people for a long time, it's hard for some of that not to rub off on you, quite frankly. And I've always got to do the things I'm passionate about. And that's been with me for a very long time. I think when I wrote the Luck book, I realised some of the things I was doing were actually, part of that lucky mindset. I've just been very fortunate because I've got to do what I care deeply about.
Well, Richard, I wonder if your luck is about to change now as I hand the microphone over to the people in the audience here at the Edinburgh Festival. And so, if you'd like to ask Richard Wiseman a question about his life, his science, his luck, lying, ESP, anything, now's your chance. Yes.
So first of all, I have to say you're very inspiring. So thank you very much. And I work with children. I do a lot of, we have to do positive behavioral in schools because in America, we need our children to behave better. And we found also that helps with our academics. So I'm wondering, have you done any research into that.
I think it's crazy that we teach our kids about maths and science and all these things. Of course, they need to know that. But we don't teach them the fundamentals of positive psychology. We don't tell them how to cope with life, which is going to be coming their way. And we need to get those lessons over there. So every kid should leave school knowing how to be a bit happier, how to cope when things go badly, how to be luckier in life. Those should be fundamental skills we're teaching, and we're not doing it at the moment.
I remember well the Megalab lying experiment, and as a legal journalist here, what I took from it and put to one of the senior Scottish judges was that from now on there should only be blind people on criminal juries or people wearing a mask. But I wondered, at a broader level, what you think is our need as a society to believe that there must be some way of telling whether people are lying.
We like that idea, and there absolutely isn't. So the lie detecting machine, we love that idea. The fact you could link somebody up to something that measures heart rate and skin conductance and so on and know whether or not they're telling the truth. Absolute baloney, because all you're doing is finding out how anxious they are, and experienced liars are not particularly anxious when they tell their lies. And I think we just need to live with the uncertainty. We need to live with the notion that we can't tell reliably when people are lying and not. Your notion about the jury makeup is interesting. There's a very well-known company that deals with insurance claims, so when you phone up and say, this is what's happened to me, who knew some of those people who are phoning up and not telling the entire truth? And they only employed partially incited and blind people to answer those calls because they think their lie detection abilities for voice are way better than sighted people. So there is actually a quite concrete application for some of that Megalab work.
Hi, it's been really inspiring. I'm actually about to start a PhD in psychology myself as a mature student here.
Very good.
I just wondered, in relation to any of your work on positivity or lying or luck or making your own luck, if you'd looked into gender differences or found any.
We did look into them. There's a little bit difference in terms of belief in luck, but in terms of actually across the board, for most of my work in terms of positivity, there's no differences at all. So I'm very drawn to interventions that work for most people, most of the time. And so take the gratitude intervention. So at the end of each day, you look back on the day and you write down the one thing you have a sense of gratitude for. You know, whether it's your health or your family or your friends or one wonderful thing that's happened that day, in order that when you go to sleep, you're focusing on that, not the terrible things. That intervention across the board raises affect and happiness. So I'm drawn to those sorts of interventions.
And that's been proven, has it?
Oh, yeah, there's a huge amount of research into that. So that gratitude intervention has got a huge effect size with it, yeah.
So what will you be saying thank you for today, Richard?
Well, the obvious one, which is it's been sunny most of the day. So, it's been fun. What a joy to chat.
Indeed.
And what a lovely group of people.
Well, absolutely. So I should say thank you to everyone here at the Edinburgh Festivals, but mostly thank you to you, Richard Wiseman, for sharing your life scientific.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
This is the BBC World Service, bringing you the incredible story of the doomed Apollo 13 mission.
Friday, April 17th, 1970. This is the closing act of the mission of Apollo 13.
Okay, does it look like it's still going down? That's affirmative, yes.
NASA's aborted expedition to the moon.
Apollo 13 with Kevin Fong. Listen to the whole series now at bbcworldservice.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And at bbcworldservice.com, the cultural frontline.
He's the artist who's dedicated himself to the understanding and exploration of sound. We hear from Nick Ryan on the soundscapes of our world, and he tells us why he wants us all to share what we hear during lockdown.
NewsHour is next. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Welcome to NewsHour from the BBC World Service. I'm Pascal Harter. Russia has recorded its largest daily increase in coronavirus cases so far. If the outbreak continues, will the country be able to cope?
Our history shows that Russians are best during the crisis. We can mobilize ourselves really fast.
As Spain eases its restrictions, the French president announces a month-long extension of stay-at-home measures. There's fear in Indonesia that as people flee the capital, they take the virus with them to their villages.
Our houses are tiny. We are not like the rich who have space to stay at home. We can't stay in our houses. It's impossible. There are so many of us. There is no way we cannot mix with lots of people.
And a balcony in the Italian city of Verona. Could it really be the setting of love in a lockdown? That's after the news.
Hello, this is Danielle Jarowiecka with the BBC News. The French President Emmanuel Macron has extended the coronavirus lockdown there for another 4 weeks until May the 11th. In a televised address, he said the current restrictions had slowed but not beaten the virus. And he said vulnerable people should stay in isolation even after the rules were eased. From Paris, Hugh Schofield reports.
For the first time, the French have a date, May the 11th, around which they can start to think about organising their lives. Up until then, everything is to remain the same. Isolation is working, the president said. The number of people in intensive care is starting slowly to fall, and for the next 4 weeks there must be no let-up. But after May the 11th, he said, schools and nurseries will progressively reopen. People will gradually return to work, though cafes, restaurants and cinemas will remain shut.
Earlier, Italy became only the second country in the world to suffer more than 20,000 coronavirus deaths after the United States. Britain is now recording more deaths each day than anywhere else in Europe. The head of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, has warned against the early lifting of restrictions imposed to slow the spread of the coronavirus. Several countries are considering relaxing such measures, but Dr. Tedros stressed that any decisions must be based on protecting the public's health.
While COVID-19 accelerates very fast, it decelerates much more slowly. That means control measures must be lifted slowly. It cannot happen all at once.
The Governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, has announced that more than 10,000 people in the state have now died with COVID-19, but that the worst of the outbreak appears to be over. For the first day in a week, New York has recorded fewer than 700 deaths. Mr. Cuomo said the virus was causing a horrific level of pain.
Again, for perspective, 2,700 lives were lost in 9/11, and 9/11 changed every New Yorker who was in a position to appreciate on that day what happened. And the number of lives lost was horrific after 9/11, and the grief was horrific. And we are at 10,000 deaths.
The authorities in Ecuador say police and the military have removed nearly 800 bodies from homes in the city of Guayaquil in the past 3 weeks. More than 600 others have been collected from hospitals where mortuaries were full. The port city is the centre of the COVID-19 outbreak in Ecuador, and local officials were unable to cope with the number of victims. Images of bodies abandoned on the streets last month caused widespread shock. World News from the BBC. The head of a medical research company in Italy says he expects his firm to make a coronavirus vaccine available as early as September. Piero Di Lorenzo of Advent IRBM says clinical trials of the vaccine, which they developed with Oxford University, will start by the end of this month. The US Senator and former presidential hopeful Bernie Sanders has endorsed Joe Biden's campaign to take on Donald Trump in November's election. Senator Sanders pulled out of the contest to be the Democratic Party's nominee last week, leaving the former vice president as the only remaining candidate. Anthony Zerka is in Washington.
I think it's a bit of a surprise that it happened so quickly and as wholeheartedly as Bernie Sanders endorsed Joe Biden, saying he was going to do everything he could to make sure that Joe Biden was president. They talked about creating some committees to come up with policies that Joe Biden could run on. You have to remember 4 years ago when Bernie Sanders ran against Hillary Clinton, Sanders campaigned until the end of the process, did not endorse Hillary Clinton until the middle of July. So I think this represents at least a certain amount of unity within the Democratic Party that they are going to need to take on Donald Trump in the fall.
A series of tornadoes and severe storms that struck the southern United States on Easter Sunday is now known to have killed at least 19 people. The worst affected states were Mississippi, Louisiana and Alabama, whose governors have declared states of emergency. The storms destroyed hundreds of houses and other buildings and caused widespread power cuts. Tea planters in India say the coronavirus lockdown has meant they've had to stop production just as the picking season was due to begin. In the region of Darjeeling, where a brew known as the champagne of tea is grown, the first leaves of the harvest have already been lost. The damage is expected to make it harder for firms to pay workers, millions of whom could lose their jobs. Those are the latest stories from BBC News.
Hello and welcome to NewsHour from the BBC World Service, coming to you live from London. I'm Pascal Harter. The Russian leadership seems to be bracing the country for the full effects of a coronavirus outbreak there. So far, Russia's figures have been enviable in comparison to other countries, 130 deaths. But the number of known cases has rocketed up to nearly 16,000 now. And at the weekend, dozens of ambulances were seen queuing outside a hospital just outside Moscow to drop off patients. Alarm bells seem to be ringing for the Russian President Vladimir Putin.
As we can see, the situation is changing almost every day. Unfortunately, it is not changing for the better. The number of infected people increases and there are more severe cases. The coming weeks will be decisive. That means that all our action, including prevention measures and the overall organization of the healthcare system, should be optimized.
Mr. Putin addressing his government by video conference today. He has introduced extensive surveillance measures as part of the stay-at-home restrictions. For a sense of Russia's preparedness and the extent of its lockdown, we heard from our Moscow correspondent Steve Rosenberg.
People have been told they have to stay at home. They can go out, they can walk to the nearest shop or chemist, food shop. They can walk their dogs, but no more than 100 metres from home. They can go out and throw the rubbish. They can go out for medical treatment, and they can go to work if they have to. But I think there is a sense in City Hall here that those measures haven't been as effective as they'd hoped. The lockdown is being tightened this week, and the Moscow authorities are introducing a system of digital passes. Now, to begin with, this will be concerning transport. So if you want to drive your car to get to work, or if you want to take public transport or get a taxi to go to the supermarket, then you will have to get a digital pass, and you can get online or through a text message or by calling a special telephone number, and you'll need that to go out. And I think that the authorities are hoping that by tightening up this lockdown, they can try to slow the spread of the virus.
Steve Rosenberg in Moscow. But how concerned is the Russian public? Andrei Afanasiev is a journalist with Tsargrad TV. That's a pro-government channel. I started by asking him about those surveillance measures put in place, and specifically that residents must apply for an online permit to travel so that their movement can be monitored.
The authorities think that that's the way to keep people at home, because if you really need to go somewhere, you will use it. Otherwise, you'll be just, maybe, too lazy to do something on the internet and get this code. Me personally, I haven't tried it yet. I will, maybe in a couple of hours, maybe after we talk, because I was planning to go to my country house.
Are you still planning on going to your country house? I thought that restrictions had been put in place now.
Well, you can go to your country house, but you just need to give the information to the government that you are going to do so. You will be granted the permission if you need to get to your office, if you need to get to doctor.
Experts inside Russia have said that they feel that the government has acted too slowly and done too little to prevent a catastrophe. What's your sense?
What we can see now is the official data all over the world. We don't know the real amount of people being infected. Maybe you and I, we both are now infected by this coronavirus and just don't know about this. And in Russia, the percentage of people dead out of the number of people being infected is one of the lowest in the world. So that's the answer. I think it is irresponsible for any journalist, especially for myself, to use unverified information in this case. So we can only now use the official information. I cannot say that I totally trust all the governments all over the world and the information they get. Sometimes they give us the wrong information, even non-voluntarily, because, well, they cannot test 7 billion people globally in one day. So we'll see. What we know now is that it's not a catastrophe and not so many people have died from coronavirus in Russia.
Even with the most transparent government in the world, the number of cases also reflect how many tests are being carried out. So we can't know, as you say, how many people in Russia are affected unless everyone was being tested. But there has been criticism, hasn't there? For example, Dr. Vasily Vlasov, an epidemiologist at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow, said it's not that Russia responded slowly, it's that the response from the beginning was not adequate.
I can tell you that the society is really united now, and the volunteer groups, for example ours, I worked for an NGO called Two-Headed Eagle, are growing tremendously. A lot of people file their documents to join the volunteer movement to help pensioners and people with the kids and people with serious diseases to stay at home. People buy food and medicine for them.
And yet, just a few days ago, it seemed as though people were not taking the orders to stay home seriously. We understood that during the warm weather, the week that people had been given for a holiday, people were instead going for barbecues, meeting with friends and family. But now you believe they are taking it seriously?
Well, more people do. In general, Russians are people of high discipline. And what you need to do is to convince the people that it's serious. And when everyone is convinced, our society will respond in a good way.
And as a volunteer yourself and as a journalist, do you think that Russia is well prepared for a crisis along the lines that the US is facing, for example?
Well, our history shows that Russians are best during the crisis. We can mobilize ourselves really fast. So I hope that not only Russia, but all the world will overcome it as soon as possible, because it's a joint thing and we need to solve it together.
How concerned are you about Russia's border with China?
I'm not, because Russian borders are well secured.
You seem very confident about the situation in Russia. Where does your confidence come from?
I'm confident because I am confident in my people and in my country. And I know the history of Russia. And I know the psychology of Russians, and I'm pretty sure that we will overcome it.
And you yourself, sir, will you be visiting your friends and family when you go to your country home?
I'm not sure. I think we will stay there with my wife.
And any more relatives?
I'm not visiting my parents for 3 weeks already because my father is more than 65 years old, and it can be a danger for him. Because no one knows whether I'm possessing the virus and also I just try to not to risk the health and life of my parents.
That was Andrei Afanasiev of Tsargrad TV. Indonesia has already suffered the highest number of deaths from the coronavirus in Asia after China. But given its testing rate is among the lowest in the world, there is fear official figures mask the true scale of the virus. In recent weeks, thousands of people have left the capital to go home to villages across the archipelago, raising concerns that it will spread to areas where there is significantly poorer healthcare. Jakarta, for now, remains the epicentre of the outbreak. Our Asia editor Rebecca Henschke reports.
After her garment factory closed, Cacat Nintas, like thousands of others, is planning on leaving Jakarta to go back to her hometown on the island of Sumatra. I know the government tells us to stay home and not travel, but we need to eat, she says. In the village we can survive this, but here in the capital city we have to pay for everything. Schools and shopping malls have been closed for weeks in Jakarta, the epicenter of the pandemic in Indonesia, and people have been told to work from home. But President Joko Widodo has stopped short of enforcing a lockdown, saying the economy has to be kept alive, and calling on people instead to practice social distancing. But being able to do that in many places of the capital is very hard. Setiawati lives with her husband and 6 families in a 2-bedroom house down a narrow alleyway just wide enough for a motorbike to pass. Children run up and down it, and people sit chatting together on the steps.
Our houses are tiny. We are not like the rich who have space to stay at home. We can't stay in our houses. It's impossible. There are so many of us. There is no way we cannot mix with lots of people.
The governor of Jakarta is increasingly worried, demanding the central government dramatically increase the amount of testing, pointing to data that shows funerals in the capital have nearly doubled in the last month. Amongst the dead are a growing number of doctors. They make up around 12% of the official death toll linked to the virus. No one is counting the number of nurses. 37-year-old Ninuk, a nurse at one of the top state hospitals in Jakarta, was one of the first to die. Her husband Aro says she wasn't given protective gear. I got the virus. Do you think I can survive? He says she asked him. I told her to calm down, and I said it was in the hands of Allah. I could only lift up her spirits, he adds. Shortly before she died, he says Ninuk told him, I lived to care for those I loved and died doing that. I told our children that their mother was a hero, that they should be very proud of her. There are further fears about what will happen when the virus reaches remote islands where the healthcare system is even less prepared. A group of men guard an alleyway to a complex in Yogyakarta in central Java. A white sheet with the words lockdown painted in red hangs next to them. They inspect any new arrivals and spray them with disinfectant. We're trying to protect our people, Susikswanto says. In the absence of government lockdowns, we have to do something. Lots of people are coming home from Jakarta, he says. At the end of the Muslim fasting month in May, there's usually a mass exodus out of the cities into towns and villages across this vast archipelago. There are growing calls for that to be banned this year. The government hasn't done that yet, but religious leaders here in the world's largest Muslim nation are saying, if you love your family, don't go home.
That was Rebecca Henschke reporting. And here on the BBC World Service, we would like you to share your stories of how the coronavirus is affecting you and your community. What are the challenges that you're facing and how are you trying to cope? You can record a voice memo on a smartphone, and to find out what to do with it, you can go to bbcworldservice.com/response. Also on the BBC News website, there's a lot of information about the latest figures in the coronavirus and stories about how different countries are coping with it. We have an article on Lagos, How Will My Children Survive the Lagos Lockdown, and how that's being viewed in Africa's most populous nation, Nigeria. Also information on what Europe will be like after the lockdown, after it emerges. We'll be hearing more on that later in NewsHour. Coming up, the backlash against foreigners in the Central African Republic.
This virus is being seen as an imported virus because of the huge amount of international staff who work in the country. In some corners of Car's media, we're seeing talk of the poisoning of an entire people.
In other headlines, the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, has extended the country's coronavirus lockdown for another 4 weeks. The World Health Organization has warned governments not to lift restrictions too soon. More than 10,000 people in New York State have now died with the virus, but the governor, Andrew Cuomo, says he does think that the worst is over. And in other news, the US Senator Bernie Sanders has endorsed his former rival Joe Biden as the Democratic Party's candidate to challenge Donald Trump in November's presidential election. This is NewsHour coming to you live from London. Iceland has taken a very different approach than most countries caught in the coronavirus pandemic. The government has restricted gatherings, but only of more than 20 people. Schools and daycare centres remain open, and as far as tourism is concerned, the country is open for business. What Iceland has done is introduce really extensive testing. Partnering with a private company, anyone who wants to get a test in Iceland can. This has thrown up an interesting result. Half of the people who tested positive in randomised trials in the community were found to be asymptomatic, to have no symptoms at all when they were tested. So what's the significance of that? Thor Gudnason is Iceland's chief epidemiologist.
Well, it means to us that we're probably having a lot of asymptomatics going around in the society without knowing at all that they are infectious. We don't know exactly how infectious they are, but I think the literature says that they can certainly infect others. However, we believe that people with symptoms who are coughing and runny nose and things like that, they probably are more infectious than asymptomatic people. But anyway, we use the same approach to all, whether they have asymptomatic infection or not. They're all put into isolation, and we do an extensive contact tracing of everybody and put them into quarantine.
And what is that quarantine like? Is it enforced by the police?
No, it's not. We don't have the police force to do it. So we ask people and beg people to do it. And people are very compliant here in Iceland. It's a surprise to many people that how compliant the Icelanders really are. So we feel that majority of people assigned to quarantine, that they follow the quarantine pretty rigorously.
Now, your approach has been criticised, including by members of your parliament, because, for example, you were very late compared to other countries in terms of telling people to stop gathering. Even now, up to 20 people can gather together. Primary schools are still open, some non-essential businesses. Why have you not imposed a stricter lockdown?
Well, it's because right from the beginning, from the first case diagnosed, that we have been very aggressively testing everybody. And we have tested about 10% of the population in Iceland already. And we have a big team composed of policemen and people from the healthcare system doing contact tracing and putting people into quarantine. And we have done that from the beginning. So we feel that we did not have to apply those very rigorous banning of people going outside.
It's easy to imagine that many countries would like to do what Iceland has been doing, but perhaps their populations are not so willing to restrict their movement, or maybe they didn't have the testing available. What has really allowed you to pursue this strategy? Was it partnering with a private company to take all of these tests that perhaps the health service wasn't able to?
Yeah, in many ways it was. It was the Icelandic genetic company Decode. They have been doing the community testing, and that has proved very helpful to us because we see that the prevalence in the society of infection is probably less than 1% actually.
And did you have to surrender anything in order to give them the go-ahead to take tests? For example, people's privacy, their biometric privacy?
No, not at all. And we're not paying them. They feel that this is their own obligation to do.
Now, Iceland is incredibly interesting from a point of view of biometrics, isn't it? Because you have a small population, a very homogenous population. Does that mean that you're able to look at the virus more in isolation from other effects? You're really able to look at what it does?
There are a lot of potential research possibilities in this. I mean, we can look at the virus, how it behaves and how it infects people. The Decode genetic company looks at the genetic composition of the virus, and they have found out that the virus is not so homogeneous. It's changed quite rapidly and within Iceland. So I think in many ways we can have a full picture of what's going on. And we have also plans on looking at why some people get more severe symptoms than other people. Maybe it's a genetic composition, maybe it has something to do with the virus or the host. So I think it's easier for us than many other countries.
Iceland's chief epidemiologist Thor Gudnason. Now, this might sound too good to be true. An Italian couple who fell for each other during the lockdown. Love at first sight across their balconies. And the star-crossed lovers actually live in Verona. Yes, just like Romeo and Juliet. This is apparently what happened, though. A modern-day version of the story. Every evening at 6 o'clock, people in Italian cities gather on their balconies to chat and perform music. You've probably seen it on social media. And Lisa Agnelli plays the violin while her sister Paola helps her with the sound system. Across the street, Michele was paying careful attention. They've been speaking to the BBC's Martha Carney.
At 6 o'clock, there is some music for the happiness of the neighbors. So every day I play violin on the balcony. And that day, on the 17th of March, my sister was helping me with the audio. And Michele saw my sister and fall in love while I was playing We Are the Champions.
So, Paola, tell me, from your point of view, what happened the night that Lisa played We Are the Champions?
I went out onto the balcony to see Lisa playing her violin, and I saw Michele standing on the opposite balcony. I realized he was my friend Silvia's brother. And I said, "What a handsome man!" After that, when the music was over, I got a message on my Instagram account. It was from him, and he said I could write a book, Love in the Time of Coronavirus. That night, we wrote to each other until the early hours. We realized we shared the same values and that those would be a solid base for a relationship. We're both determined people, but also kind and sensitive. Michele truly is a special person. He organized a big surprise for me by writing my name on a bedsheet and hanging it out of the balcony. I was very moved by it. There's not much we can do for each other right now, but that was a great surprise. Michele knows how to caress my soul with his sweet words.
Michele, so this was love at first sight, amore alla prima vista.
Yes, it is a colpo di fulmine. Is
like a thunderbolt.
Yes. Ho visto questa splendida ragazza.
I saw this beautiful woman standing next to Lisa, and I didn't know her. I had never seen her before. From that day on, we were like teenagers in love. It all started as a bit of a joke, really. I didn't even know if Paola had a boyfriend. At the beginning, I was just trying to make her laugh, but then I fell in love with her. She's so easygoing, she's happy-go-lucky, but at the same time she's a mature woman who knows what she wants.
Matura che sa quello che vuole.
So what would you like to do when you meet Paola properly for the first time?
When the pandemic is finished, I want only kiss her for 1 hour.
Lisa, of course you all live in a city that's so famous for romance on a balcony.
Yes, Verona is the city of Romeo and Juliet, so this is the perfect story.
That was Lisa, Paola and Michele from Verona speaking to Martha Carney, and I do think that Lisa's term, Music for the Happiness of Neighbours, has got to be the title of an album coming soon.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, keeping you up to date and informed.
The focus of all political parties should be to save their people. Please don't politicize this virus.
Right now, life is changing for all of us around the globe.
Unfortunately, we all can't be together.
Tokyo is noticeably quieter.
Here at the BBC World Service, we're bringing you regular roundups on the spread and implications of the coronavirus.
We're not just writing pages in the books of economics, we're writing pages in history books.
We have all the latest medical information, news of work towards a treatment, and reports from the affected areas.
The African American population is being hit way harder than anyone else.
The global effects on health, business, sport and travel, here on the BBC World Service.
Coming up on NewsHour in the next 30 minutes, the Central African Republic, where fear of foreigners spreading coronavirus could hamper the health system's ability to deal with it. What President Trump's retweet of #FireFauci tells us about where the US is heading, and European plans for reopening. All that coming up after the news.
BBC News with Danielle Yawowiecka. The French President Emmanuel Macron has announced that his country's coronavirus lockdown is to remain in place until May the 11th. In a televised address, he said the current measures had slowed but not beaten the virus. Elsewhere in Europe, Italy has become the second country in the world after the United States to register more than 20,000 deaths. The head of the World Health Organization has warned governments not to ease restrictions too quickly. Tedros Ghebreyesus said such a move could lead to a resurgence in cases. For the first day in a week, New York State has recorded fewer than 700 fatalities, but the overall figure has risen above 10,000. The governor, Andrew Cuomo, said the worst of the outbreak appeared to be over. The White House says President Trump has no intention of firing the federal government's top expert on infectious diseases, Anthony Fauci. On Sunday, retweeted a call for him to be sacked, but a spokesman insisted that Dr. Fauci remained a trusted advisor. McDonald's in China has apologized after one of its restaurants in the city of Guangzhou barred black people because of fears that Africans were spreading the virus. The company said the outlet had closed temporarily for training on diversity and inclusion. In other news, Bernie Sanders has endorsed Joe Biden's campaign to take on Donald Trump in November's presidential election. Mr. Biden is all but certain to be the Democratic Party's candidate. Senator Sanders, who suspended his campaign last week, called on all Americans to unite to defeat Mr. Trump. He described him as the most dangerous president in modern history. Italian police say a group of 77 illegal migrants has landed on the southern coast of Sicily. The migrants, all from sub-Saharan Africa, were on board a rubber dinghy. The local mayor said they were in good health. BBC News.
You're listening to NewsHour. The appearance of the coronavirus in Central African Republic is complicating an already difficult situation. There is a backlash now against foreigners who are seen as bringing the virus in. An Italian missionary was identified as the first case of the coronavirus in the country. 70% of the country's health service is provided by the United Nations and other aid organisations, mostly staffed by non-nationals. Jack Losh is a journalist who has just returned.
The UN has extended a curfew on its employees for what an internal memo shared with me described as recent incidents of verbal aggression, intimidation and stigmatization of UN staff and international aid workers. This virus is being seen as an imported virus, and it's being associated with foreigners because of the huge amount of international staff who work in the country. They're being seen as the ones who brought it in. Now, this all began happening about a month ago when an Italian missionary was reported to be the first confirmed case of coronavirus. And since then, there has been this association between the virus and foreigners. We're also seeing in some corners of Cars media alarmist, sensationalist rhetoric. For example, a tabloid last week accused France of using a coronavirus mutation to destabilize francophone African countries. And then in other parts of the media, we're seeing talk of the arrival of this infected Italian as the poisoning of an entire people.
It's easy to look at this kind of conspiracy theory as outlandish and ridiculous. But here in Britain also there are conspiracy theories about the coronavirus, enough so that people are burning down 5G masts. And can you give us the context in the Central African Republic? What level of understanding is there of education? Do people have any access to soap? Do they understand about how viruses are transmitted?
These stories, this scaremongering, is coming from a very real and understandable place of concern. This is a country that for the last 7 years, it's been embroiled in a terrible civil war. We're now at a stage where a population of 4 million people have access to only 3 ventilators. Stocks of testing are low. Right now, there's only been less than a dozen confirmed cases in the country. But given cramped, dense living conditions of people in shanty towns, it's exactly those kind of conditions that present the perfect environment for pathogens like coronavirus to spread rapidly. That's the concern among humanitarian workers.
And if the humanitarian workers can't do their work at the moment for their own personal safety fears, where does that leave the general population?
If they're facing threats and violence spread by the media and elsewhere, they're going to be shutting down operations in the places where they're needed most.
That was journalist Jack Losh, who has recently returned from Central African Republic. This is NewsHour on the BBC World Service with me, Pascal Harter. The White House has issued a statement saying that the top infectious disease specialist in the United States, Dr. Anthony Fauci, is not about to lose his job advising the government. The US president had put that into question when he retweeted a tweet that said, "Time to #fire Fauci." We voiced up the White House statement.
This media chatter is ridiculous. President Trump is not firing Dr. Fauci. The president's tweet clearly exposed media attempts to maliciously push a falsehood about his China decision in an attempt to rewrite history. It was Democrats and the media who ignored coronavirus, choosing to focus on impeachment instead. And when they finally did comment on the virus, it was to attack President Trump for taking the bold, decisive action to save American lives by cutting off travel from China and from Europe. Dr. Fauci has been and remains a trusted advisor to President Trump.
That statement follows lots of speculation that Mr. Trump disagreed with his main advisor on how to handle the coronavirus pandemic, and that the two men's vision for relaxing restrictions was quite at odds. Until now, there's been a fairly united front, though. But speaking to CNN on Sunday, Dr. Fauci was asked if lives could have been saved if the lockdown in the US had begun several weeks earlier, as he is reported to have advised. And this is what he said.
Obviously, you could logically say that if you had a process that was ongoing and you started mitigation earlier, you could have saved lives. Obviously, no one is going to deny that. But what goes into those kinds of decisions is complicated. But you're right. I mean, obviously, if we had right from the very beginning shut everything down, it may have been a little bit different. But there was a lot of pushback about shutting things down back then.
Dr. Fauci will be hearing from the woman who posted the #FireFauci tweet that earned President Trump's approval. But first to the BBC's Anthony Zerka in Washington, D.C. What stage are we at, I asked him, about the containment of the coronavirus outbreak in the US?
I think at this point you are seeing perhaps some leveling off. You heard Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, talk about a plateau of cases in that state, and New York City, which has been hit the hardest of any area in the United States by the coronavirus, that hospitalizations are going down, that fatalities are going down. Although the emphasis from Andrew Cuomo and others here in the United States is that even if a peak is being reached, that shouldn't be a cause for optimism, that there are not going to be any more deaths, any more hospitalizations, and that there couldn't be a new peak at some point if things are eased off too quickly, that if they go too quickly, officials go too quickly to reopen businesses and allow the economy to start back up again. And I think that's what you're seeing by Donald Trump's comments is this conflict within his own team about whether to open up and start businesses sooner or heed the public health experts who are cautioning that this is far from over.
So it seems then that this was a sort of fortuitous tweet as far as President Trump was concerned. It seemed to put forward that point of view. Well, let's hear now from the woman whose #FireFauci tweet was shared by President Trump. She's Deanna Lorraine, and she ran as a Republican candidate against House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in a California primary last month. She got 1.8% of the vote. So why does she think it is time for the president to fire Dr. Fauci?
There's a number of reasons why I've been skeptical of Dr. Fauci as of late.
Number one, he has changed his projection models endlessly, showing that he doesn't seem to really have a clue what the actual toll from coronavirus will be. You know, he started projecting 2 million plus deaths, I believe, and now that projection is down to 60,000. So that's a pretty big difference there.
Is that not simply a reflection of the success of the measures that have been taken in the US?
It definitely could be a reflection of that, but he seems to be constantly projecting a lot of fear and a lot of doom and gloom, sort of worst case scenarios, whereas President Trump is focusing on hope and rebuilding the economy again as soon as possible, rebuilding the country as soon as possible. And the fact that there are so many stories, too, more than less, of people who have gotten the coronavirus and recovered. So why aren't we talking about the recovery rates as much as the death rates?
He's very respected in the scientific community and indeed in the political community, isn't he? Is it 6 presidents, though, that he has served? And he's also seen as somebody who does his own research, not just taking credit for others. So he does seem to have the credentials. Would now really be the moment in the midst of this pandemic to get rid of somebody with his kind of expertise?
You know, I trust the president to make the right decisions. I trust that he has good instincts and that he'll follow them. And I also trust that he will remove people if they're not a good fit at the right time. So I'm not necessarily saying that he should fire Fauci and do it now. But
Really?
I think
you put a hashtag, Fire Fauci.
You know, it could be now, it could be in the future, but I want him and other people to at least consider that he may not be the best person to represent and be at the helm of this coronavirus epidemic.
I'm just trying to get a sense of on what basis you would like to get rid of Dr. Fauci. Is this about the economy and suffering and you'd like the restrictions to be eased?
I want lives to be saved. I want the American people to be told the truth. And of course, I want the country and the economy back to work as soon as possible. I mean, understand that we have, in the blink of an eye, we have been told that this is a pandemic, that, our entire world has gone on lockdown. We have introduced this term called social distancing, which we've never heard before, and now it's everywhere. So we just want to know the truth, that's all. And I'm not sure if Fauci is really acting in the best interest of the people.
That was Diana Lorraine, whose tweet was retweeted by the president. Anthony Zerka for the BBC in Washington. This comes, of course, doesn't it, at a time where we're getting a fuller picture of what the White House knew when in terms of the risk that the coronavirus posed.
Right. There have been news reports now about people like Anthony Fauci warning against the dangers of this virus and recommending drastic steps to lock down earlier, to do more social distancing earlier, to prevent the kind of spread that we're seeing now. And I think there is a sensitivity on the part of Donald Trump's, which is why he retweeted this woman who, as you mentioned, only won a few percentages of the vote against Nancy Pelosi in California, because they're defending him and defending the steps he took early on, which he said shows that he was aggressively addressing the spread of the virus. And I think he doesn't like the idea that people are suggesting, or he's taking criticism for not heeding experts in the field like Anthony Fauci, and instead downplaying the risks posed by the virus for months before he took the steps to and follow the governors who were locking down the states and shuttering businesses.
Nonetheless, does that point of view, you could say shooting the messenger, the person who is saying we need to continue these restrictions if we want to save lives, does the point of view we heard from the tweeter there that the restrictions are too much, that this is too difficult, an impatience for the economy to get started again, does that resonate with many people?
I think it is definitely a balancing test that public officials from Donald Trump on down have to do. They have to listen to the health experts who are warning the continued dangers of the virus, but there are very real consequences to the U.S. economy, unemployment and a dropping GNP, a stock market that has been struggling, and it's going to take a while to start that back up again. But that is something that they're going to have to balance. And if you look at the polls of Americans, generally Americans are telling pollsters that they support support these aggressive steps to enforce social distancing, to keep people on lockdown, to prevent the spread of the virus, because Americans are scared. They're scared personally of what the virus could do to them or their loved ones, and they're willing to make sacrifices for it to go forward. But remember, there's an election in November. Donald Trump's name, as well as a number of politicians, are going to be on the ballot, and they have to deal with the economic consequences long term. So there are different forces, different influences on their outlook on this, perhaps, than Americans right now who are facing the concerns that could affect their health and those of their loved ones.
The BBC's Anthony Zerka in Washington. The US Senator and former presidential hopeful Bernie Sanders has endorsed Joe Biden's campaign to take on Donald Trump in November's election. Senator Sanders pulled out of the contest to be the Democratic Party's nominee last week, leaving the former vice president as the only remaining candidate. On a live webcam hosted by Mr. Biden, Senator Sanders called on all Americans to unite to defeat Mr. Trump.
Today I am asking all Americans, I'm asking every Democrat, I'm asking every independent, I'm asking a lot of Republicans to come together in this campaign to support your candidacy, which I endorse, to make certain that we defeat somebody who I believe, and I'm speaking just for myself now, is the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country.
Senator Bernie Sanders. On the 11th of April 1970, Apollo 13 launched from Cape Canaveral. It was NASA's third manned mission to land on the moon, but just 2 days later, the world watched transfixed when an explosion crippled the spacecraft. Getting their astronauts home was to become one of NASA's greatest challenges. This wasn't a mission for the superstitious either. This was Apollo 13, scheduled for launch at 13 minutes past 1 in the afternoon. That's 13:13 on the 24-hour clock. And superstition aside, the bad luck began even before the spacecraft blasted off the launch pad. For the second series of the BBC World Service podcast 13 Minutes to the Moon, Kevin Fong has been speaking to the astronauts on board and their relatives and colleagues about the various mishaps and misgivings before Apollo 13 really got into trouble.
Ignition sequence has started. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have commit and we have liftoff at 2:13.
It was a very herky-jerky ride, I'll say, compared to anything I experienced in airplanes, which was, I'm sure, exaggerated because you're way, way up on the tippy top of this large rocket.
13 Houston, go at 1. We show the cabin relieving. 13, roger.
Well, it was old hat for me. I mean, relatively speaking, I know what to expect, and the things worked perfectly. The booster, the Saturn V, did its job. Everything was really fine.
And 13, your go for staging.
Go for staging, roger. We're EDS manual. And lit the third stage of our booster, and it powered us going all the way to the moon. Suddenly, on the third stage, there were 5 engines. One of them shut down. There's another sign of, is Apollo 13 a bad number?
We'll be featuring more stories about the flight of Apollo 13 every day this week, and you can learn about the extraordinary ordeals that the crew went through and how NASA managed to bring them home safe by searching for 13 Minutes to the Moon Season 2. That's a podcast that we've got here on the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC World Service, looking at criminal justice reform in Houston.
Harris County Courthouse, Houston, a place undergoing a revolution in criminal justice.
We've come a long way, baby. Texas was considered the lock-em-up capital of the nation. And over the last 8, 9, 10 years, Harris County has become a model for progressive criminal justice reform.
A year ago, voters in Texas elected new liberal judges to their local courthouse. These new judges promise to remake justice in America's fourth largest city.
We don't need to see a single mother who is driving with a suspended license held on a $5,000 bond that she can't afford to pay. However, what has happened now is we are seeing documented gang members getting sweetheart deals.
I'm Carrie Blakinger, and I'm seeing what changes have taken place and if they've been a good thing.
Houston, we have a new justice system at bbcworldservice.com/documentaries.
A reminder of our top story this hour. Russia has recorded its largest daily increase in cases so far, with more than half in the capital, Moscow. Andrei Afanasiev, a journalist with government supporting Tsargrad TV, told this programme that Russians were taking the coronavirus threat seriously.
Our history shows that Russians are best during the crisis. We can mobilize ourselves really fast. So I hope that not only Russia, but all the world will overcome it as soon as possible.
Our other headlines. The president of... In Spain, with confidence growing.
Today we begin the fifth week of confinement, our fifth week of struggle, actively combating together against coronavirus. The responsibility shown by the whole of the Spanish public during these past weeks, which has shown a clear example of what we are all capable of doing together. And as we have said in repeated briefings, it's already being borne out in terms of the results, in how many people are being infected, in how many are being cured.
So what does the easing of restrictions mean for Spain's economy? The BBC's Guy Hedgecoe reports from Madrid.
The sound of a digger clearing land just west of Madrid, and a return to normality of sorts for many Spaniards. A national lockdown has been in place for 4 weeks. A so-called economic hibernation had been part of those restrictions for the last 2 weeks, preventing the movement of non-essential workers. But today they have gone back to work. That includes construction workers and those who work in factories and other heavy industry. In Madrid and other cities which have been virtually deserted in recent days, there was slightly more activity as police handed out face masks to people using public transport. The return to work of an estimated 4 million or more Spaniards has been controversial. The Prime Minister, Pedro Sánchez, has insisted that this doesn't mark the beginning of a broader relaxation of the lockdown, which he says is likely to be extended at least until mid-May. But some opposition politicians have warned that today's partial return to normality might jeopardise the stabilisation of the virus. Recent figures do suggest that the situation is improving. 517 deaths were recorded over the last 24 hours, compared to more than 900 daily deaths being registered earlier this month.
Meanwhile, the head of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, said that countries need to be careful in terms of how quickly they ease the lockdown conditions.
We know that in some countries, cases are doubling every 3 to 4 days. However, while COVID-19 accelerates very fast, it decelerates much more slowly. In other words, the way down is much slower than the way up. That means control measures must be lifted slowly and with control. It cannot happen all at once.
Words which appear to be heeded by the French President Emmanuel Macron, who addressed the nation to give praise for the restraint shown by the public so far in staying at home and to call on people to show still more restraint as he extended the lockdown for another 4 weeks.
Partout, en hexagone comme dans les outre-mer.
Everywhere in France and the overseas territories, the healthcare system is under strain, and the epidemic is not yet under control. So we must continue our efforts and continue to respect the rules. The more they are respected, the more lives will be saved. That is why the strictest lockdown must continue until Monday, May the 11th.
Public life in Germany may gradually return to normal if certain conditions are met there, including an infection rate stabilising at a low level. That's according to recommendations sent to Chancellor Angela Merkel and the heads of Germany's 16 regions on Monday. Germany's National Academy of Sciences, the Leopoldina Academy, recommended a gradual relaxing of restrictions in stages if new infections stabilise at a low level and personal hygiene measures to avoid the spread of the coronavirus are maintained. Chancellor Merkel will discuss the recommendations with her cabinet on Tuesday. The current restrictions, which include limiting public gatherings to 2 individuals, are to remain in place until April the 19th. Gerald Traufetter is a reporter for Der Spiegel. I asked him what kind of Germany the report envisages after the lockdown.
Germany will still look very different from what we know, because people should still remain distance from each other. They will also wear masks in the future, nose and mouth masks. This will change the public life dramatically, because at the moment not so many people are wearing them, but in the future they will wear them in supermarkets, they will wear them in offices, they will also wear them in schools. Pupils will wear them.
And what will the first things to be eased be?
The recommendation of the National Academy of Science clearly points out that the schools have to start as soon as possible, because primary schools, they need to start working. I mean, pupils can't really work online. This doesn't work, and they also have a plan. They say, okay, we will restrict classes to 15 pupils, and these 15 pupils will go into the break. They will have German and they will have math lessons, and after they had lessons, then the other shift will take over, so that none of these pupils can meet each other. This is basically the recommendation.
It sounds very complicated. How likely is it that these recommendations would be adopted by the government?
I think they will be adopted, because there is a high will to continue education. In Germany, we also have a problem with social inequality in education. And certainly, the longer pupils stay at home, then these social differences will grow in the population.
So there's concern then that people will be falling behind about the effects of the lockdown?
Yes, yeah.
At the same time, the impressions I'm getting from Germany, from my family there in Berlin, saying that it's all doable, that people are very much abiding by the rules and managing their lives. Is there the same sense of impatience that you see in Spain?
Yeah, I mean, people stick to the rules. However, we see when scientists read the data from mobile phones, for example, they see that people are getting more and more mobile. So I think politicians have to find a way to strengthen compliance. And what the scientists basically say is, if you give the population a perspective when this shutdown will ease, then you will raise the compliance. You will have more people willing to follow the hygienic measures and the hygienic action much more thoroughly also in the next weeks.
That was Gerard Traufetter from the magazine Der Spiegel speaking to me about the report by Germany's National Academy of Sciences outlining what the easing of the lockdown will look like there. On the BBC News website, we've also got information about what France will look like, as Emmanuel Macron, the president, says that around 11th of May is when the lockdown will ease, and that will involve schools reopening gradually. A lot more information on the BBC News website. From me and the rest of the team on NewsHour, thanks for your company.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, and here's what's happening in the studio this week.
Imagine an entire mountain, 5 kilometres wide and hundreds of metres tall, lit up in such beautiful colours that the dazzling display makes the rest of the world just melt away. This is what Finnish light artist Kari Kola is trying to create in the picturesque landscape of the west of Ireland.
In the studio, Tuesday at 10:30 and 21:30 GMT. And in 30 minutes, Kim Chekanetsa hosts The Conversation.
2 experts on female sexual health discuss why we need to talk more candidly about the vagina. You'll hear why there's still such mystery and shame associated with female reproductive organs, why that needs to change, and what they're doing about it.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Welcome to the Y Factor on the BBC World Service. I'm Nasran Tavakolifa, and I'll be asking why we keep open secrets. When a lot of people already know something, what stops them from revealing it?
why would I have to be the person to speak up? Any person can speak up. Why should I be the one to throw all this chaos sort of in front of me?
Why do people continue to do things below the radar?
A lot of times there's the good for the person versus the good for the group.
And why is it so difficult to make some open secrets official?
It's even worse, obviously, if they've been successful. They'll say, well, these behaviours and attitudes and ways of doing things have got me here. Look how successful I am. I'm a senior person in this role, making lots of money, doing really well. Look at the size of my house and my holidays and my yacht and my, so what's my driver for change?
That's all coming up next after the news.
Hello, this is Danielle Yarowiecka with the BBC News. The French President Emmanuel Macron has extended the coronavirus lockdown there for another 4 weeks. In a televised address, he said the current restrictions had slowed but not beaten the virus. He said schools and some businesses would gradually reopen after the new extension, but restaurants would stay closed. Hugh Schofield reports from Paris.
All this will be possible, the President promised, because by May the 11th there will be enough tests available to test anyone showing symptoms of COVID-19, and because there will be enough affordable masks available for everyone to have one. Psychologically, it's an important moment for the French, who at least can see now the prospect of the shutdown ending, though everyone knows that long after May the 11th, life will continue to feel very different.
The head of the World Health Organization has warned against the early lifting of restrictions imposed to slow the spread of the pandemic. Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus said easing measures too quickly could lead to a resurgence in cases as the virus spreads very rapidly but is slow to decelerate. The Governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, has announced more than 10,000 people in the state have now died with COVID-19. But for the first day in a week, New York has recorded fewer than 700 deaths. Nada Tawfik is there.
New York has entered a new phase in its battle against the coronavirus. After the deadliest week yet, finally, new infections are down, as well as hospital and intensive care unit admissions. Attention is now focused on when and how to reopen the economy. Governors of 6 East Coast states, including Governor Cuomo, have announced that they will work together on a safe plan to ease restrictions in the region. Together, the states make up more than half of all recorded coronavirus cases in the United States.
The White House says President Trump has no intention of firing the federal government's top expert on infectious diseases, Anthony Fauci. On Sunday, Mr. Trump retweeted a call for him to be sacked after Dr. Fauci said that imposing social distancing earlier could have saved lives. The authorities in Ecuador say security forces have removed nearly 800 bodies from homes in the city of Guayaquil in the past 3 weeks. Matthias Zibel reports.
The port city of Guayaquil is the center of the coronavirus outbreak in Ecuador. Local mortuaries couldn't cope with a large number of people dying from COVID-19. Images of bodies abandoned on the streets caused widespread shock, prompting the government to set up a special team of police and military personnel to deal with the crisis. As well as collecting bodies from homes, the team has retrieved more than 600 from hospitals, whose morgues are full.
BBC World News. Italian police say a group of 77 illegal migrants has landed on the southern coast of Sicily. The migrants, all from sub-Saharan Africa, were on board a rubber dinghy. The local mayor said they were in good health and being held in quarantine. On Sunday, another 100 newly arrived migrants were quarantined in hotels in the southern province of Syracuse. The US Senator and former presidential hopeful Bernie Sanders has endorsed Joe Biden's campaign to take on Donald Trump in November's election. Senator Sanders pulled out of the contest to be the Democratic Party's nominee last week, leaving the former vice president as the only remaining candidate. Senator Sanders called on all Americans to unite to defeat Mr. Trump.
I am asking all Americans, I'm asking every Democrat, I'm asking every independent, I'm asking a lot of Republicans to come together in this campaign to support your candidacy, which I endorse.
Mr. Biden thanked his former rival for the endorsement, saying he needed him not just for the campaign, but to govern. The United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization says about 1 million people in Ethiopia are in need of food aid after swarms of locusts destroyed vast areas of farmland. Working with the Ethiopian government, the UN found desert locusts had damaged about 200,000 hectares of mostly sorghum and maize fields. Kenya and Somalia have also been badly affected this year. Tea planters in India say the coronavirus lockdown has meant they've had to stop production just as the picking season was due to begin. In the region of Darjeeling, where a brew known as the champagne of tea is grown, the first leaves of the harvest have already been lost. The damage is expected to make it harder for firms to pay workers, millions of whom are at risk of losing their jobs. That's the latest BBC News.
My name's Cassius, the Neon Explosion. I'm wearing a silver sequin bolero, pink hot pants, which are custom made for me, by the way. They have my name on the back. And I usually wear pink tassels down my legs as well.
I'm watching two men in a wrestling ring fighting each other. They're landing punches, bouncing off the ropes and slamming each other onto the floor. There's a wrestler dressed like a tree landing a blow on a wrestler in pink hot pants. Despite the flamboyance I've just described, the men really are being aggressive to each other. But the thing is, the fighters and the promoter all know which of the men is going to win. So what's that conversation like, where it's you, the competitor, and the promoter, and you're sort of deciding who's going to win? Who makes the decision? How does that go down? Is there a negotiation or a conversation or something?
So the promoter tells you who's going to win. There's no negotiation. I mean, I wish there was. I would negotiate. No, I'm joking.
Have you tried?
No. There's a little joke backstage that some of the people, they go, oh, Cassius loves winning, so he always wants to win. But yeah, it's not about winning or losing, it's about putting on the show for people. So the promoter will come up to you and say, okay, so I want you over, and that means you're winning, yeah. And then tells you how long he wants the match to go, yeah.
So imagine you and I were up against each other, and it was determined that you were going to win, because you always win. Okay. How does that play out in the ring? Like, do you tend to decide that at one point you're going to make a certain move and then I'm going to concede? Like, you know, what actually goes on up there?
So the end of the match, you'll plan the finish of the match. So you kind of know, oh, you're going to jump off the top rope and you're going to miss or something. And then we'll work out a finish from there and then we'll go do it.
Wrestling isn't the only place that has open secrets. They also lurk in religious organisations, in businesses, and in families as well. This is the Y Factor on the BBC World Service. I'm Nasra Antavakoli-Farr, and on this edition I'm asking, why do we keep open secrets? I guess my main interest in open secrets comes from being a journalist. Journalism is all about exposing the truth and making a bit of a scene to enact change, which is why open secrets fascinate me. Why do people keep them? And what sort of ecosystem enables them to exist?
What seems to be interesting about open secrets relative to, let's say, normal secrets is a typical secret is primarily kept by a single person.
Michael Slepian is a professor of management at Columbia Business School. He's done research into the secrets people keep and has also developed a theory of secrecy.
The idea of open secrets really sort of resonates with my theory of secrecy, because the idea of an open secret sort of at first sounds like an oxymoron, but that only sounds like an oxymoron if when you hear secrecy, you hear hiding and concealment. But my theory in research suggests that secrecy is something that's far more broad than that. The larger theory of secrecy here is that if you intend to hold some piece of information back from people, that's a secret.
And so I guess an open secret allows you to at least let some other people in on it without having to.
Yeah, and so the idea with an open secret is, you know, it could still feel very much like this is a thing we don't talk about and that bothers me and, you know, that's on my mind and that burdens me. even though you don't have to actually hide it. You've done something that you don't want people to know about or had an experience that you'd rather keep to yourself, and you're sort of the primary gatekeeper of that secret. Now, if there's something like an open secret where, say, there's something happening in your workplace and, a lot of people are aware, maybe not everyone, and for the same reason we're not talking about it because it'll all blow up. Now we kind of have multiple gatekeepers where any person could speak up, any person could sort of blow the whistle, but they don't.
And what stops people from doing that?
I think people are sort of fear the backlash that might happen if someone's trying to rock the boat, even for the right reasons. I think a lot of people sort of don't want to be in that position where they're the ones who sort of change things, because things probably get worse before they get better.
Are there certain types of ecosystem that give rise to open secrets?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say the kind of environment where information kind of flows down certain conduits and not others, So there's this topic in the literature called voice, and do we feel like we have voice to speak up when we see something wrong? And when people do see something wrong and they don't speak up, it's because the norms, for example, in the workplace just simply don't encourage that. It's sort of better to, stay silent and do your job rather than making waves. So the kinds of places that don't have those open channels for that kind of communication, I think, would be more likely to find themselves in this situation of having an open secret.
A lot of times there's the good for the person versus the good for the group.
That's communications professor Sandra Petronio. In her career at Indiana University, she's also specialized in how people reveal secrets. She did research with children who had suffered sexual abuse to find out how they disclosed it. She says people make trade-offs, both before they break an open secret and also in the aftermath.
The open secret idea is, I think, a really important one. Like if people in a family knew that there was one member that was sexually abusing one of the children in the family and they didn't deal with it, then it's a problem for the entire family. It would be really encumbering the family to make a choice about whether or not they believed that the person in the family had been molesting a child in the family. And it's a secret that has lots of consequences.
What do you mean by this?
They know about the abuse, but they're in denial. They don't necessarily want to take on responsibilities like that, because then if their husband is the perpetrator and if a person wanted the marriage be salvaged, then there would be lots of complications about the decision to disclose that they even knew that this was going on.
Attorney Mitchell Garabedian is based in Boston, in the US. He spent decades representing victims of sexual abuse, including cases of sexual abuse at the hands of the clergy.
The children talked with each other. They would call priests certain names and say, stay away from so-and-so, stay away from Father Gagan, stay away from many priests. They would have nicknames. They would shy away from the priests. They would tell each other in code.
Mitchell's efforts uncovering the open secret of priests abusing children in Boston was made into an Oscar-winning film called Spotlight. The movie shows a community where everyone knew something was happening, but it was all kept under the covers. In the case against the priest John Gagan, Mitchell reached a financial settlement with the Boston Archdiocese on behalf of 86 people for over $30 million. He also ensured that plaintiffs wouldn't have to sign non-disclosure agreements. During his time with clients, he observed how this open secret was preserved.
Because there is such a stigma in society about being sexually abused, it's really a very, very big stigma. There was not much talk about a person being sexually abused amongst parents, a child being sexually abused, because there was such an attitude of, well, you're going to be tarnished for the rest of your life, you're going to be tattooed with this negative image for the rest of your life, let's not talk about it.
But why has there been such a culture of open secrets regarding sex abuse in the Catholic Church?
When a child is sexually abused by a priest, that child who respects the priest, who is taught that the priest's voice is the voice of God on earth, that child is threatened by the priest. The child is told by the priest, if you tell anybody about the sexual abuse, your parents will burn in hell, or your parents will get divorced, or you'll be kicked out of school. And the child believes that. And then when the parent reports the sexual abuse to a pastor or monsignor or bishop, the pastor or the monsignor or bishop tells the parent, for the sake of the church, because the church does such great things and the church is God's representative on earth, you must keep this quiet. You must keep it secret, and we'll take care of the matter. Don't worry about it. And the parent believes that.
What role did the community play?
Oh, the community was really... the community was highly skeptical of me. They were highly skeptical of my work. How dare you accuse a priest of sexual abuse? How dare you accuse a priest supervisor, a pastor, a monsignor of allowing it to happen? This could not happen. These are priests. They take vows of poverty, and they do so much good for the community. So there was a lot of skepticism, a lot of negativism. There was a lot of, sometimes anger at me concerning my work. But I knew it had to be done.
Are there ways in which people in the community would sort of cover up?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when I filed my first cases involving gagging, the clerk looked at me and he said, I go to St. Andrew's Church Parish. It's about time somebody did this. The community just kept the matter quiet because they were so involved with the Catholic religion. We have a concept here in the United States called cradle Catholic. That's a family that is so Catholic, and there are many cradle Catholics, who put the needs of the church before the needs of their own family, and they're taught that. So if you have $1 and you don't have any food, and the church wants that $1, you give the church that $1. That's called a cradle Catholic.
That brings us back to Sandra Petronio's idea of acting for the benefit of the group rather than for yourself.
A lot of times there's the good for the person versus the good for the group.
This is seen in other arenas too.
I sometimes describe my role as teaching middle-aged men the difference between lying and telling the truth.
Joe Garrity is brought in by banks to combat the problems that can result due to teams having open secrets.
We can kind of say, well, this is a lie and this is telling the truth. You know, why is that not clear? It's pretty black and white. Why are there shades of grey? And they will come with their shades of grey, which will be, well, either everybody else is doing it, I thought it was someone else's responsibility to report this. If it's not okay, I don't see it as my responsibility. You know, people have been doing this for a long time. You know, nobody's ever said to us that we can't do it. My manager does it. I'm very loyal to my manager. I think this is the right thing for the company.
Joe Garrity has seen many grey areas in the finance industry.
Maybe, you know, it's kind of small fudging of the profit and loss on a daily basis that they think, well, it's okay because I'll correct that before month end when anybody's actually going to look at it. Or maybe telling clients that they filled an order at a certain price when that wasn't strictly true, but everybody does it. It's very common practice. It's okay. I made slightly more money on this deal than the client thinks I did. It's not even technically illegal or not permissible. It's just not completely ethical either.
How do you make people who might not care about ethics sort of care about ethics?
Again, I think it's something that's changing slowly. The old guard, as I call them, so probably people in their mid-40s and older, like me, will be retiring. They'll be moving on. They'll be doing other things. And we'll see Generation Z, so loosely described as anybody born, you know, mid-90s, you know, moving into the workplace. And research has shown that they are much more ethics-focused. They're much more purpose-focused. They will not work somewhere that they can't see has a bigger purpose than just making money, and they You know, they're prepared to work hard. They're not necessarily in the game for shortcuts and, you know, finding other ways around. And they will be prepared to speak up, even if the rest of the team are saying, and the manager saying, no, this is the way we do it here. We've always done it this way.
So why do people keep open secrets?
That's a very big question. I think there are lots of different answers. I think the main piece is, you know, certainly from a trading floor perspective, trading floors are highly competitive, highly charged environments where people have been hired to make money predominantly. I mean, that's their job is to make money. And they will find any innovative, creative way that they can to do that. It's even worse, obviously, if they've been successful, they'll say, well, these behaviours and attitudes and, you know, ways of doing things have got me here. Look how successful I am. I'm a senior person in this role, making lots of money, doing really well. Look at the size of my house and my holidays and my yacht and my, you know, so what's my driver for change?
The crowd certainly seem to have chosen their favourite.
My name is Greg Burridge. I'm the head trainer of the London School Lucha Libre. But on Lucha Britannia, I'm the king of the scrap heap, Metallico, half man, half machine.
This half-man, half-machine taught Cassius that the main aim in wrestling is not to win, but to put on a great show. Do you remember how you found out that the outcomes are predetermined?
Oh, I must have been 12, 13. I remember reading in one of the papers that the World Wrestling Federation had to declare that their quote-unquote sport was actually a form of entertainment to basically avoid either getting taxed or a federal law passed on them. So they had to basically say it was a form of entertainment. That's when I first kind of had an obvious idea that wrestling is actually a predetermined thing. But I think deep down, all kids know it's not real. Deep down.
How did you feel when you found out that it's not real?
I kind of knew. It was this confirmation of course. It's that little voice in the back of your head that goes, of course she was right. I'm not crazy, it's not real. So for me, it wasn't a bad thing to realise that wrestling wasn't real. It was actually a good thing because a lot of my unanswered questions as a child, my sleepless nights were finally answered with certain lingering questions of why is he doing that? That move doesn't make sense because of this. How is it when he's giving him a move and drops him on his head, they're both staying down? And all these different silly little technical questions were answered. So it made me feel like I wasn't crazy.
So for years, before it became official that the outcomes are predetermined, it was kind of an open secret, right? So why was that? Why did everyone sort of know but not sort of openly acknowledge the outcomes are predetermined?
Exactly the same reason that mums and dads don't tell Father Christmas isn't real. I think it's exactly the same thing because you want to keep a child's innocence for as long as possible.
The moment which Greg talks about was on the 10th of February 1989. The World Wrestling Federation declared to the New Jersey State Senate that wrestling was about entertainment anyway. They did that so that they could remove wrestling from the Athletics Commission regulations. It meant they wouldn't be obliged to have referees, licenses, or timekeepers from the athletics authorities, or to have to pay a tax to them. So, for financial reasons, it was worth it for the WWF to reveal this open secret. But sometimes the weight of knowing something with explosive potential just becomes too much. In fact, living with a secret can be harmful to your health, says Columbia Business School's Michael Slepian, whom we heard from earlier.
What we find in our research is that what's harmful about secrecy is not having to hide it. It's having to think about it. It's having to live with it and be alone with it.
Michael says people make a trade-off, working out what's worse, the burden of having this secret going round and round in their head, or what they imagine could happen to them if they tell.
People want to do something, I think, often, but they're sort of afraid of the consequences of speaking up.
Sandra Petronio says that in the case of children and sexual abuse, children often carefully test the waters to see if it's safe to tell the truth, and to whom.
They would tell a little bit to a person, and then they would wait to see what they did with that information, and if they met the threshold of seriously helping the child, then they would tell a little bit more and a little bit more until they made a full disclosure. The children looked at tacit permission to tell. If somebody said, "Are you doing okay today?" they could discern that that person was on their side. They would take that opportunity to work through perhaps that they might want to tell that person the next time they saw that person. And they would not tell any adult anything unless they were not making eye contact with them. They would do it when they were helping their parents after dinner wash the dishes, if they were cleaning their pool or in a car, as long as they didn't have to look at the adult, because that made them feel uncomfortable.
And with adults, Michael says another calculation is also made.
People are trying to do that cost-benefit calculation, and, sometimes it might seem like, well, why would I have to be the person to speak up? Any person can speak up. Why should I be the one to throw all this chaos sort of in front of me? And it's a totally reasonable suggestion. It's kind of like a commons dilemma problem. One solution perhaps is banding up with other people so you're not in it alone. Another is to really closely investigate what channels are possible. A lot of organizations have employee relations departments where the specific purpose is to bring these kinds of things to the table, which can be handled in a discreet and, practical way.
It seems people keep open secrets because they're in denial. Open secrets serve as a way of keeping the peace between various parties. They exist when people simply don't want to look at the reality of a situation and to have to take any responsibility for it, or to have to deal with any subsequent consequences. Be it in a family or a church or even with a demanding boss, open secrets allow everyone to pretend that a certain situation simply didn't happen. The stakes are especially high if the open secret pertains to people's very identities. It's hard to acknowledge the truth when it may question an entire industry, a community's whole way of life due to its religious beliefs, or if it may threaten cherished ideas people have about members of their own families. And open secrets will continue in a climate where people don't think they'll be believed if they speak openly about a situation. This episode of The Y Factor was presented by me, Nasran Tavakoli-Farr, and was produced by Claire Spencer. The editor was Andrew Smith, and the sound engineer was Graham Puddifoot. If you enjoyed this, you may also like our episodes asking why do we eavesdrop and why do we have conspiracy theories. For Cassius, we heard that the secret is out that the wrestlers know who's going to win. He, for one, hoped his promoter would tell him that he'd be winning that night. But other forces took control, as an over-aggressive throw by a wrestler whose character was a tree led him to genuinely getting hurt in the ring.
Cassius!
Goes against the ropes, hooks him up, spins him round.
Timber!
Oh, he spins him round once, he spins him round twice. Oh! A blow to the shoulder. And the shoulder has been damaged. It's going to take him longer to recover.
This is the BBC World Service, bringing you the incredible story of the doomed Apollo 13 mission.
Friday, April 17th, 1970. This is the closing act of the mission of Apollo 13, NASA's aborted expedition to the moon. 4 days ago, their spacecraft was crippled by an explosion. Since then, Mission Control has battled round the clock just to keep the crew alive.
Looks like we've got about 40 minutes left in that tank. Okay, does it look like it's still going down? That's affirmative, yes.
Across the globe, millions of radios and television sets are tuned in to witness the astronauts' fate. The world is watching, waiting.
We're now coming to the last moments of Apollo 13 as it comes in, as it begins its re-entry. The best thing we can do now is just to listen and hope.
Apollo 13 with Kevin Fong. Listen to the whole series now at bbcworldservice.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
You'll hear from two experts on a mission to combat the misinformation women are given about the vagina, a part of the body that's still shrouded in mystery. One is a myth-slaying gynecologist in America, the other a Kenyan doctor who gives talks to young girls and women. You'll hear about some of the wacky misconceptions that persist, how they change minds, and why a whole industry has been built on women's fears about being dirty or smelly.
BBC News with Danielle Yawowiecka. President Emmanuel Macron of France has announced that the coronavirus lockdown is to remain in place there until May the 11th. In a televised address, he said the current measures had slowed but not beaten the virus. Italy has become the second country in the world after the United States to register more than 20,000 deaths, and Britain is now recording more deaths each day than anywhere else in Europe. The head of the World Health Organization has warned governments not to ease restrictions too quickly. Tedros Ghebreyesus said such a move could lead to a resurgence in cases. For the first day in a week, New York State has recorded fewer than 700 fatalities, but the overall figure has risen above 10,000. The governor, Andrew Cuomo, said the worst of the outbreak appeared to be over. The White House says President Trump has no intention of firing the federal government's top expert on infectious diseases, Anthony Fauci. It comes a day after Mr. Trump retweeted a call for him to be sacked. The authorities in Ecuador say police and the military have removed nearly 800 bodies from homes in the city of Guayaquil in the past 3 weeks. More than 600 others have been collected from hospitals where mortuaries were full. In other news, Bernie Sanders has endorsed Joe Biden's campaign to take on Donald Trump in November's presidential election. Mr. Biden is all but certain to be the Democratic Party's candidate. Senator Sanders, who suspended his campaign last week, called on all Americans to unite to defeat Mr. Trump. Another new case of Ebola has been reported in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo, the third in a matter of days. The announcement by the World Health Organization marks a further setback to the country's hopes of declaring an end to the outbreak, which began in 2018. BBC News.
A warm welcome to The Conversation, the programme about how women are transforming the world. I'm Kim Chakanetsa, and each week on the programme you'll hear from two women from different countries with a shared profession, passion or experience. Now, there are at least a dozen synonyms for the vagina. Coy terms like lady part, vajayjay, kitty or cupcake. The use of these point to a general unease associated with talking frankly about the vagina. Women's genitals, it seems, are still shrouded in mystery, and that's led to them being misunderstood and also mistreated. My guests are two women on a mission to combat the misinformation women are given about their reproductive organs. Dr. Jen Gunter is a Canadian-American gynecologist and author of the bestseller, The Vagina Bible. Jen has garnered a massive following on social media for her ability to deploy her wit and knowledge in the service of women's health. And Dr. Susan Adongo-Meme is an obstetrician and gynecologist at Kenyatta National Hospital in Kenya. It's the country's largest hospital. Her remit there ranges from delivering babies to treating gynecological cancers. Welcome to you both. Now, I suspect there may be a few listeners who might be mildly or thoroughly uncomfortable at the thought of a candid discussion about women's sexual health. So explain to us, Jen, why is this something you think is important to discuss?
Well, I think it's very important to discuss simply because so many people might be uncomfortable about it, never mind the idea that people should know about their bodies. You know, talking about the vulva, vagina, how we have sex, these are medical things, and there shouldn't be any shame in talking about your body, and certainly everybody needs to have accurate information about their body to make empowered healthcare decisions.
So, Susan, Jen thinks it's about, making empowered decisions and, getting rid of the shame. For you, why should we be talking more openly?
I think especially because of the culture that we have where I come from, where it is thought of as taboo to talk about sexual health and issues surrounding, the reproductive system. So because of the fear and the taboo that comes with it, we have a lot of people suffering from issues and illnesses, and they don't come out clearly. So we end up having more more complications associated with this. And I feel that if we're able now to talk openly about these things, we'll have more people coming out and freely discussing the issues that surround the reproductive system, so to speak.
Okay. Now, Susan, when it comes to the vagina, myths and misinformation abound. What for you is the most common myth you've come across in Kenya?
The most common myth is that people think that there is only one, let me put it this way, that you pass urine through your vagina. So the girls believe that there's only one passage for anything that comes out, down there, so to speak. So they come to you and they think, oh, I have a UTI, or it's inside my vagina, or, they think the periods, it all comes out through that area. So you have to keep, telling them, no, the anatomy is not as it seems.
And what do you think, Susan, accounts for that lack of understanding about the location of women's reproductive organs?
Still going back to the whole taboo thing, it's not, it's not something we look at. It's not something we learn about. And right now in Kenya, they're trying to roll out the comprehensive sexual education, and it's really being fought by different sectors. So even when we learn it in school, it's brought out very superficially, and it's your reproductive system is not something that you should look at or you should be curious about. God forbid you should even bring it up. So it's left to your imagination what is possibly going on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and I know that resistance is around the idea that it might lead to promiscuity. Now, Jen, of all the many myths that you've heard, which for you is the most pervasive and which would you like to see banished forever?
Well, I think one of the most pervasive myths we have is that the vagina is dirty and that it somehow needs to be cleaned or prepped in some way for sex with men.
Okay. Now, so that's one right there. Now, in your book, you list some other practices women are doing to their vaginas based on old wives' tales or just general misinformation. Can you tell us a few of those?
Yeah, well, we still have a lot of people who are douching here. That's not necessarily based in an old wives' tale, but it's a very common one. The douches that are sold at the store have the same warnings as cigarette labels, about harm, and yet they're still purchased. There's a sort of a trend, or I guess this is based on old wives' tales or historical inaccuracies about the vagina needing to be tightened. So there's a lot of use of, I guess, astringents. Vaginal steaming would be sort of one riff on that as well, this idea that the uterus and vagina need to be cleaned from toxins, so which it doesn't, and there aren't toxins there. So that's a pretty prevalent problem.
And Susan, for those listeners who might not know, what is douching? Could you explain that to us?
Douching is essentially an attempt to clean the vagina using different sorts of chemicals or using soap for some people. So just to add on to what Jen has said, with that belief that the vagina is unclean, some people just use brushes, some use fingers, and all sorts of things, cloths that they insert and in an attempt to clean the vagina, more or less. Yeah.
And Jen, are there any beneficial effects to douching?
No, not at all. It's very harmful. It damages the mucus, the cell layers of the vagina, the vaginal bacteria, and increases your risk of getting bacterial vaginosis, which is a bacterial imbalance of the vagina. It increases your risk of getting HIV if exposed. And even just wiping inside with a cloth, as we just heard about, it gives an increased risk of getting HIV if exposed. So, we are seeing even right now, there's a company advertising on Instagram to sell special devices to do that, to wipe out the inside of your vagina after sex. So, we're still seeing companies prey on these fears in different ways.
So if the medical advice is not to do it, and it's damaging and it increases the risk of infection, why does the practice continue, Jen?
Well, I think, this is an age-old way that women's bodies have been weaponized against them. If your mother and her mother and her mother and so on since the beginning of time has been brought up that their vaginas are dirty, right, that there's something wrong with their normal bodily functions, it becomes a lot of bad history to undo. And if your worth in society has been distilled to your reproductive tract, then you can see how these fears perpetuate. And then you add the fact that we can't talk about body parts, so we can't educate people. And where do you go to get information about something that you've been told is shameful? Well, you don't go to better sources, you go to clandestine sources. So, the system is set up to keep people in the dark, and it's hurting people.
And Susan, in Kenya, how is this information being passed? Is it, from woman to woman, from mother to mother? How are people learning about douching?
Actually, yeah, it's also being passed from women to women. The first time I heard about it was actually at a bridal shower. We usually have these bridal showers where you invite sort of older women to come and speak. And that is one of the main things they actually like to talk about. They insist upon it, talking to the new bride about it and all the other girls who are present. And they even demonstrate, how it's done. And when I finally went into medicine and into obs-gyn and found out that, this is actually it's not a practice that is encouraged. And even when you try to speak up against it, they look at you like you do not know what you're talking about. So it's also passed down from the older women to the younger women, and it's really emphasized, in this setting.
Now, Jen, there is a thriving feminine hygiene industry. If you go to any pharmacy, you'll see there's a wide range of products promising to make your vagina smell of roses or clean laundry or whatever the scent may be. Do we need them?
No, we don't at all. Mm-hmm. They're these are cigarettes for your vagina. Okay. That's the best analogy I can give.
That's very clear then. Susan? I could just hear you laughing. I just wondered if you wanted to bring you in there, or were you just I guess that was a very pithy and clear.
Statement, the cigarettes for the vagina statement. Yeah, that was I was just laughing at that.
Okay.
Caught me off guard. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I have the same experience as Susan. When I try to tell women who are douching about how harmful it is, they absolutely look at me like I don't know what I'm talking about. So I'm clearly filled with misinformation. It's the exact same experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, Jen, you're quite well known for taking on companies that make dubious claims for vagina-related products, including, for example, Gwyneth Paltrow's group, who had to row back on claims that their vaginal jade eggs could, and I quote, increase vaginal muscle tone, hormonal balance, and feminine energy in general. Why do you think women are seeking these things out? Why is there an appetite for these things?
Well, I do think it's a combination of the fact that we haven't got the education level to where we need to be. So we still have women looking for these products, and now they've been rebranded in ways that sort of tie in with the wellness movement. So I think there's that. And I think that in Western medicine, we have done a very bad job at including women in conversations. We've done a bad job at being available for all of women in the way that they need. And you have this sort of big wellness industry coming in and acting like they're listening to everybody when really what they're doing is selling products. And so what they're doing is they're capitalizing on the gaps in medicine instead of filling them.
Let's pause for a moment. You're listening to The Conversation, and I'm with two expert guests, Dr. Jen Gunter and Dr. Susan Adongo-Meme. We're discussing a part of the body that's often shrouded in mystery and shame, and therefore widely misunderstood. The vagina. Mm-hmm. Now, Susan, when you are trying to change someone's mind, to dissuade them from a harmful practice, what sort of approach do you take? Do you use humor? Do you explain the science to them?
It's tricky because the patient demographic that I see currently, come from a low socioeconomic status. Mm-hmm. So some of them are not as educated as you may. So you have to really grade the education level of the patient you're talking to. So sometimes I go the scientific way, but other times I just use, analogies like how things are changing and how nothing stays the same over time. And you try and talk to them maybe about the the various side effects that this would bring to them, and maybe use pictorials and pictograms to help them. But it's usually very difficult changing some of these things because they are really, really set in our tradition. Mm-hmm. So it's a struggle, to be quite honest, especially with the kind of patients that I deal with. But sometimes when I give talks to younger girls in schools, that is where I start targeting these people from when they're quite younger, and that you can bring in some scientific basis to it, and you can see that if you start from that level, then it's better. But for the older generation, it's difficult. It's difficult.
Jen, is that the way to go, by speaking and focusing on the younger generation?
Oh, I think absolutely. Getting people before they've been exposed to misinformation is key, and letting them know at an early age that talking about your body is fine and knowing information about your body is a good thing. I have a package from a douche in my office that's got the warning label on it, and I have a cigarette package with a warning label. And so when I have trouble getting through to people, I just show them the side-by-side comparison. Sometimes that works.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Well, but often it doesn't. You know, people want to, it's so ingrained, it can be really hard to sway people's minds.
All right, well, let's move on from what isn't wrong with your vagina to what could be wrong. Susan, what are the symptoms that you should definitely seek medical attention for?
So if we are talking maybe vaginal discomfort, itching, vaginal discharges.
But there is, you generally do get some discharge. Is there a particular type of discharge that you should be looking out for?
Definitely, we look for a discharge that is foul smelling. Any altered color. Mm-hmm. So if you have a color, we tell them brownish, yellowish, greenish, then definitely you should seek help, because the normal discharge that we have is, it usually doesn't have a foul smell, mm-hmm. and it is almost colorless. Okay, so we try to tell them to differentiate between the two.
And Jen, what about pain during sex? Is that a cause for concern?
Absolutely. Pain with sex is never normal. And so if you're having pain with sex, that's definitely something to bring up with your doctor. And if someone brushes you off, if your doctor doesn't listen to you, then you should definitely get another opinion.
Now, as well as the embarrassment many women feel when it comes to discussing these things with a stranger or even their doctor, we've heard in past programs that women's pain is dismissed more easily by doctors than men's, and that in the US it's worse for black women. Jen, how can trust be established in these circumstances?
Well, I think that it's really important to listen to women when they come in, and to not cut them off when they're telling their story, to listen to the difficulties they've had with the system, because there are a lot, and you want to build trust. And so I spend a lot of time just listening, and then trying to explain the ways that hopefully my care is going to be different. One thing that I always do is I set up a follow-up appointment. So I think a lot of times women get treatment and they're just sort of sent out into the ether, and then when they call back, they're sort of dismissed that, oh, why hasn't this worked, which is absolutely wrong. And so what I do is I set up a follow-up appointment. And I give people expectations about when I think their treatment should improve, so that they know that I'm not going to leave them hanging.
All right, let's talk about the hymen. Now, an intact hymen is seen in many cultures as an important marker of a woman's virginity. Is that even true, Susan?
In our culture, yes, definitely. If I'm to go the cultural way, the hymen is considered like the holy grail, to the extent that, girls who get married and don't bleed on their first, on the honeymoon night, you almost feel like you have not, met a certain standard. There is this joke that young girls have that they tell you that, don't ride a bike before, you break your virginity, because riding bikes will break your virginity. And, it's enough to, scare young girls from participating in such activities. So it's considered quite a big deal.
But is that even true? I mean, is there one size fits all hymen? And presumably they're quite different from person to person.
Yeah, they're different. They vary from person to person. They come in different shapes. So no, that is a myth that has been dispelled about riding bikes and riding horses.
Mm-hmm.
It essentially does not break the hymen, so to speak.
Mm. Jen, what's your stance on this hype around the hymen?
Yeah, I mean, it's a leftover remnant of the patriarchy. That would be my best description. I mean, the hymen exists to protect the infant vagina from urine and feces and dirt. Because right when you're born, the vagina doesn't have any estrogen, and it's incredibly vulnerable to irritants. And then as we start to walk and become, continents of urine and feces, the hymen becomes pliable and starts to take on all different kinds of shapes because we don't need it anymore. So the hymen is the exact equivalent of baby teeth. It's something that we needed developmentally for a small period of time in our lives, and then it's basically discarded when we don't need it anymore. So that's all it is. It's got all different kinds of shapes and pliability. It's in no way a reflection of virginity. That's a social construct, and it's very harmful to women to sort of perpetuate this myth.
What then should we make of doctors who offer surgery to rebuild the hymen?
Well, I don't think they should have a license. I think it's disgusting, personally.
Susan?
It's interesting. We don't have much of that here,
right?
In terms of reconstructing the hymen, but it's commoner in the Somali community, mm-hmm. where it like I said before, it is considered that when you're getting married, your hymen should have been intact.
Mm.
And if it wasn't, some people actually ask for some form of reconstruction just to ascertain that their families don't get embarrassed that they were not virgins when they got married.
There are also other procedures which are gaining popularity, in terms of changing the appearance of the vulva or to tighten the vagina. Why do you think there is a rise in these type of procedures, Jen?
Well, I think because people can offer them.
Mm-hmm.
I think what they're doing is they're exploiting fears. And I mean, one of the big ones that we see advertised here in North America are labiaplasties, so to make the labia minora smaller. But your labia minora are sexually responsive. So we don't know the consequences of making them smaller cosmetically. But it is the exact equivalent of making the penis smaller, right? It's a sexually responsive part of your body. And it's pretty telling that there's no practices that I've ever heard about penile reduction for, attractiveness.
This is true.
Right? Is that even a thing? Of course not.
Mm.
But Susan, isn't it a choice, like having a breast enhancement or any other cosmetic surgery for that matter?
It is. Actually, I was laughing because, as she said, you never hear of anyone having a penile reduction, so to speak. A lot of sexual responsibility, I realize, is placed upon the woman. Mm-hmm. A lot of, the responsibility of sexual satisfaction, the burden is placed upon the woman. So you will find many women lining up to have the vaginal injections to bring about tightening, the labioplasty, so to speak, the hymenography procedures.